Great. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on how clients can get the best out of their dynamic system. My name's Alan Reed. I'm a director of Get Savvy. We provide online self-paced project management training, as well as advice for ordinary business people faced with a technology project. The theme of today's webinar is how clients can take independent control of their own systems and data. So while Get Savvy, we're strictly independent of any particular technology or provider, it's hard not to notice that in the last 10 years, Dynamics has become the most widely used platform in the membership world. And of course, it's growing rapidly in the charity space as well. So it feels appropriate to cover that today. We get a lot of questions, we get a lot of interest around this topic, so I'm really pleased to be covering it. I'm also delighted to welcome onto the webinar David Spector and Chris Lightly from Smart Impact. Guys, could I ask you to introduce yourself? Perhaps David, if you don't mind starting.
By all means, good morning, everyone. My name's David Spector. I'm Head of Digital Services at Smart Impact. I've been working in the membership sector for almost a decade, working in digital for much longer than that, as my grey hair probably lets you know. And Smart Impact is one of the most established providers of CRM and web solutions for the membership sector. We've been doing this for the last 16 or 17 years. With a big focus on user experience. That's my sort of passion. So I thoroughly believe that user experience is applicable to both the CRM user and the front end user, i.e. your members who are engaging through the web. So that will be a bit of a theme that we follow today. And I'll hand over to my esteemed colleague, Chris, to introduce himself.
Hey, thanks, David. My name's Chris. I'm a consultant with Smart Impact. And ultimately, what I try and do is to understand client requirements. So what do they need of the system? Also help clients to understand their own requirements, understand a little bit more about what a system might be able to do. So very often when we're implementing a new dynamic system, it's difficult to always understand what the limitations of a system might be. What are the kinds of things that a client should be expected to manage themselves? What should be best left to a partner? And through that journey, it can be understanding what the client needs, going into training on those various aspects, helping administrators of those systems get the most out of it, and ultimately giving you as the client a little bit more control over that system so that it's not always needing to reach out for what might be considered simple things, but even for more complicated things that we'll go into in today's webinar. That's really what I'm here to do. Thanks a lot.
Fantastic. So thanks so much, guys. And so that's in keeping with the theme of client independent ownership of their systems. So great. So let's crack on. So just a little bit of webinar etiquette. What we'll be doing today is we'll be sending the recording of the webinar to everyone. So please don't worry about notes. Just focus on the content, and we'll send it all to you afterwards. Everyone's on mute. The Q&A box is an important thing. You'll see within the webinar tools, you've got a Q&A box. If there are questions relating to your own project, your own setup, like, oh, my partner doesn't let us anywhere near the admin, what am I supposed to do? Drop it into the Q&A, and then we'll pose those questions to Chris and David, and see what answers we can come up with. This webinar is part of our program to eliminate bad projects in the not-for-profit space. So part of that is we have a course that we're promoting. There's a 50% discount for this course. And the course is called Managing Change Projects for Business People. And essentially, it's an online self-paced course that will send you the details later, that gives you everything you need to know to manage a technology project in your own organization. And it's AI driven and very fancy, and gives you bite-sized chunks so you can absorb it in your own time as part of your busy working lives. As part of the webinar follow-up as well, we'll send you some nice looking templates and some job aids from the course that'll help you look fantastic on your own projects. And then finally, we're always desperate for feedback, so we'll ask you for comments on what we could have done better or what you liked about this webinar as part of the follow-up as well. Okay, without further ado, let's crack on. So the agenda is really straightforward. We'll talk a little bit about dynamics in the sector and what it means to be a platform solution, how realistic it is to take ownership of it within your own organizations. And then let's get to the actual areas of most interest to me, and I hope to you, which is where we're talking about the specific areas, how you can take control of your own reporting, configuring screens for your users, automating and streamlining your business processes, and then a little bit about Copilot, which is the AI tool that Microsoft have built into root and branch within CRM and elsewhere in their suite of software. Then finally, we get into the Q&A. So I'll periodically ask you to remember to post any questions you've got about your own setup or your own way of working into the Q&A box. Great. Okay, so first things first, a little bit about Dynamics. I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly so we can get into the main configuration areas. So Dynamics, as I say, has become the most widely used system in the membership world, and that's really taken place over the last 10 years. So there are a number of specialist Dynamics partners, one of them being Smart Impact. Thanks for joining today, guys. And those guys, those partners really specialize in making it fit for not-for-profit clients. So that's, and what we find now is that something like 7 or even 8 out of 10 membership CRM projects are based on Dynamics. And so it's become, not just widespread, it's become the most common, almost universal system now. So why is it called a platform solution? So essentially, platform translates into something you can build on. So we get the benefit of lots and lots of money being spent for tens of thousands or even millions of clients around the world. And it means that that functionality is done in such a way that clients can take control of it, and specialist partners can take control of it as well. So in that view, nonprofits benefit from literally millions of pounds being spent for the interests of millions of customers. And it also creates an ecosystem where you have specialist providers who are able to fit it to particular industries, in this case, the not-for-profit sector. So nonprofits then get the benefit of things that are incredibly expensive to develop, like AI, like marketing automation, etc. But then have that fitted and configured to quite niche areas. There's a pretty good chance, for instance, that Microsoft themselves don't know what CPD stands for, but your partners like Smart Impact will have highly specialized functionality in those areas, so that the not-for-profit sector benefits. And that becomes really important when we think about how much the not-for-profit sector is on a constant churn of change. So essentially, members and supporters are always getting ever more demanding about their digital engagement with you. Your staff and colleagues are getting ever more demanding about the degrees of automation and the degrees of data that they want from their systems. And if you're not able to provide that, then systems get static, and that's where people had a churn of constantly changing systems every 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And in older systems, essentially everything had to be done by the supplier, in which case it mostly meant it didn't get done. If you wanted a new report that was going to cost you, £2,000 or £3,000, and you would have to wait 3 months for it, eventually you stop asking for those changes, and the system just gets wider and wider departure from your actual business needs. So with the platform model, you as a client are able to continually adapt it to your own business teams. So your marketing colleagues will have an entirely different view of the world and data than your membership colleagues and your events colleagues. Being able to continually fit it to their needs means that you're going to get higher take-up. You're going to have people getting more out of the system and putting more in, so you as an organization are better able to serve your members and keep competitive compared to other offerings. Okay, so the exploiting the key features keeps it relevant and keeps it fresh. Does that mean you don't need a supplier anymore? Well, the answer is, in reality, the line at which you need a supplier to do things is getting pushed back all of the time. And that's a really good thing. So you used to need a supplier for every tweak of a report or every tweak of a field on your screens. That's getting pushed back all of the time. So that's marvelous. There are still some things, of course, you're going to need your supplier for. integrations to new systems is a big one. Big changes to your website, big changes to entirely new business processes might require a partner. But that point is getting pushed back all of the time. And the good news about that is it puts you in the driving seat. And really the ball's in your court then for how much ownership you are able to take on and want to take on. So let's get into the specifics. So there are 4 key areas that we're going to cover today where essentially you can configure the system, fit it to your own needs by yourself, independently of your supplier, all of the time whilst you're still on the upgrade path. So next year when Microsoft put out a new version of CRM and a new version of all of the other tools and Azure and Office and everything else, you're still on the upgrade path. You can take that upgrade. Nothing you've done with what we're talking about today will interrupt that. And of course, you're continually fitting it to your teams and what they need. So what we're going to do in all 4 areas, I'm going to ask Chris and David to comment on, imagine you didn't have all of this Dynamics knowledge and you were the membership director, you're the IT manager of this smaller not-for-profit. Where would you get started? How would you go about fitting it to your organization and your business team's needs? Okay, all right, let's crack on from there. Thank you very much for that. If you're going to have independent control, then of course you're going to need some resourcing for it. So what we've done here is to help you work out the complexity or the degree of resourcing you need. In the 4 areas we're about to go through, we've categorized them as easy, medium, hard, meaning easy, if you could really just go and do a few YouTube videos and a little bit of somebody showing you and then take control of it, that's pretty easy. Medium might be a bit more intensive, a few hours or even a half a day of training to get independent control. And then hard is you might seriously consider leaving that to a partner to do or having more intensive training. So let's start off with client side reporting as we go through. The reporting side, we think, is probably the single most important thing that you can have your system do for you. Your data is your most important business asset. We like to say it's the people, but the reality is people come and go. As a membership organization, as a charity, your data is what will help you persuade people it's worth having a relationship with you and that you understand them. And the problem is it's too often locked away. So empowering not-for-profits with their own data and within the organization, every team to meet their own needs is one of the most liberating and empowering, that word again, things that you can do, so that you've got great people who want to do a great job, give them the tools, and mainly that's the data. And then you'll just get so much more value out of that person. They'll get so much more job satisfaction out of it. So Dynamics, as a very modern tool, has some really good ways of getting at your own data, and you don't need to be a technical person to do it. So let's talk about that. Let's get into that. So on the left-hand side here, we can see some specific types of tools that Dynamics offers. And then on the right-hand side, we can see some slightly more advanced tools, some more complex tools that are on there. These are the kind of things that you can do directly within the tool, producing your own graphs, producing your own dashboards, producing your own accelerometers, and so on. And of course, in this last screenshot, you can see it built directly into the tool there. So if I can just ask Chris and David, would you mind just giving us a little bit of a verbal overview? If we talk about, first of all, dashboards, charts, and advanced find, what kind of things are you seeing that clients can take on and that do actually take on to manage themselves within their own organizations, please?
Typically, sorry, Chris, I'll just kick off and then I'll hand over to you. Typically, we see clients wanting to report on member recruitment and member engagement as 2 of the mainstays of the type of reporting they require. It allows them to forecast quite effectively against targets, to see how they're progressing throughout a membership cycle, looking at retention versus attrition, and trying to identify what they could do in terms of keeping hold of members where they might be suffering some loss due to circumstances, a lot of the time out of their control. One of the things I think is worth pointing out is that if the data exists, you can report on it. And the basic reporting requirement of any Dynamics implementation is typically covered as part of the system implementation in the first place. So this gives you a really good grounding to move forward with. You'll have a number of reports that exist when you go live, typically, and then you can start to modify those and then create variants of those that are more tailored to what you're looking to achieve as time goes on. But the quality of data is probably the most important thing. And as we all know, bad data in is bad data out. So one of the things I always recommend is that clients, when creating their own reports, do validate the output before taking it for granted, because you end up using these reports to make significant business decisions. So you want to make sure that what they're telling you is actually reliable. Chris, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think what's really important when it comes to reporting is to understand why you need the data in the first place. So what are you hoping to do with this report? So if you, from a managerial point of view, you may just want to get a summary, high-level overview of the kind of information. It's a quick glance at something you're going to look at a couple of times a day or once a week or something like that. Or are you looking to get into that data and actually work with those records? So do I want to surface a collection of records that I can then go into and analyze a bit more closely? And that will really kind of direct you into which of the options you should go for on the left-hand side. So I find that for most end users of the system, using something like an advanced find or a list view. So if you've used Dynamics and you've clicked on a contact record and you've seen that list of contacts, very often that's going to tick a lot of the end users boxes in terms of how do I find which memberships are due for renewal this month, or how do I find all new contacts that were created via the portal. Very often a list view is the easiest way to do that. And as an end user, you have the ability to create those views. You can share them with your teams. You don't need to request that from a system administrator. And then we can start to dig a little bit deeper into actually how do we visualize that kind of information. So even a view, you can have charts associated to that. So if you want to put up that information into a pie chart, you get a breakdown of different membership types and things like that. But I think it's really important to ask the question as to why do we want this data in the first place? What are we looking to do with that information?
Right. And so I think what I heard you say there, Chris, is that, for instance, if you were this membership manager or the the person who was the go-to within a membership organization or a charity, that you might start off with advanced find to get your colleagues able to get their hands on their own data. Do you think do you tend to find with your clients that offering a little bit of individual training on that, or centralizing it so that everyone's in control of advanced find at least? Is that something you would start with?
I think so. I think that there's an appetite thing. So it's about which of those users have the appetite to start digging into the data themselves. Other people would prefer a view to be created for them. What I find very often is I'll be sharing a screen, or a client will be sharing a screen with all these views, and other people on the call will be like, oh, where did that data come from? That's so cool. And then they want it to be shared with them. So to be able to see what those views can do in the first place, and then doing group training to get people up to speed with that as well.
Fantastic. I like the idea of what you've said, which is that if you are the kind of curious user, you can create a view, call it, first of the month view of members about to expire or something like that, and then you can share it with other people. They don't need to know or care how you created it. It just appears in the list under that long friendly name.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And then if we just talk very briefly, charts and dashboards. Of course, I'm used to doing it in Excel, and it's fiddly and so on, but important. How realistic do you find it is for people to be able to take control of doing charts and dashboards directly within the screens or directly within CRM, please?
So I think it is quite fiddly, and I think what David said stands true, is that generally speaking, when you're going into a new project, you're going to want to see these dashboards on day one of the system. So mapping out the type of data you want to have and having those dashboards on day one is very important. But once you understand the types of reporting and the types of analytics you can do through the dashboards, it is all very clicks, not code. So it is very possible for end users to do that, but it is a level up on complexity from the advanced find. So yes, you can do it, but I think you would probably need a little bit of training or a bit of YouTube videos on your own time as well to get a bit more information on that.
So if we talk about the oh, sorry, beg your pardon, David.
I was just
really
say,
briefly.
Alan,
oh yeah, fire away.
Well, your analogy about Excel usage is quite appropriate in this context, because Excel is a super powerful tool, but you could use it in a very basic way and still get results out of it. But the more you learn about the potential of the tool, the more advanced your outputs will be. So I think it's a very good barometer in terms of personal confidence. If I'm an advanced Excel user doing all of the crazy things I see Excel users do sometimes, I should be able to approach this with a fair amount of confidence.
Fantastic, thank you. And then just a really quick question, and I want to get to configuration. So if we look at the screenshot on the bottom right, so could you take us, where would the curious user who wants to empower themselves or their colleagues, where would they get started on being able to create something like this within their own CRM, and how realistic is it for somebody who hasn't been off to a Microsoft training weekend and etc.? What's your views, please?
So the technology that's on the bottom right-hand screen, or bottom screenshot, is actually quite old technology within Dynamics. So these kind of reportings have been around for a long time. And as a result, Microsoft's own documentation, as well as tutorials online on things like YouTube, are really quite robust, and it covers a lot of different use cases. So in terms of how do we get started, there's a little help button up at the top of your screen, which can surface some documentation around these kind of things. There would most likely be system administration limitations, so you just need to see if you actually have the ability to do this in the first place. But starting with the Microsoft guides, with some of their own examples, is probably a good place to start. One thing we didn't mention about Power BI as well is that with Microsoft's integrations into its own Microsoft products, sometimes it's actually even easier to build Power BI reports around this kind of stuff, and the ability to automatically generate those kind of reports. So again, it's going to be a question of what is the most appropriate tool for the job, but there are quite a few different tools in the kit for that.
Fantastic, fantastic. So really accessible. That's really good to hear. Okay, so then I think we've talked about this. David, thank you very much for the caution as well. It is possible to show misrepresentative data that isn't completely what we said. And great, I think you've answered the question. So what we're going to do is give that a rating of actually easy overall on the left-hand side. That it's perfectly feasible for users to take control of these areas and to really make the system individualized in terms of data for their individual teams. For Power BI, we're going to give that a medium. That's a little bit more of if you're into Excel and pivot tables, then you're probably all right. But otherwise, maybe ask a colleague. And then SQL Server reporting services is good. We're going to give that a hard. Maybe only if you're super serious would you want to get into that tool. And actually, the great majority of users wouldn't need to go anywhere near it, because there are other tools that give you everything you need in a much friendlier way. Great, thank you so much for that. Okay, so and by the way, please remember to drop your own questions into the Q&A. So that we can pose those to people, to the guys after when we get to the end of the section. Okay, so introducing the concept of configuring your own system. So this is really where you get clear blue sky between an older generation of systems and the newer generations of systems. So again, different teams will have very different needs, very different views of the world. And different types of data that they need to be able to edit and see. So configuration is about fitting it to them, streamlining their business processes, giving them a sense of ownership from it, and keeping it relevant, because obviously your business is changing all of the time. So there are some key areas that Dynamics kind of serves up to you to be able to modify yourself as a client. And again, what I'd like to do is, so, just to illustrate this point, here is the landing page for a contact. We're looking at Adeline here. And this is a view that you might have somebody who just answers the very most basic of queries and you don't like them very much, so they get the ugliest version of the screen. And then this is exactly the same person and exactly the same software, but someone's gone to the trouble of configuring the screen for that person. And it's more than the visual aspects of the screen. It's workflows and rules around fields and validation and all of those things. So again, Chris and David, could I pose the question to you guys, looking at the screenshots in front of you? How realistic is it for a client to take ownership of configuring screens so that they're different for different types of users or different business areas? And how would you get started? What would you start manipulating on the screens, or what areas where would you start manipulating to kind of empower your users, please? If I could throw it over to both of you.
I'll just quickly start off in a very non-technical manner. I think there's a lot to be said for planning the changes before you make them. And I think this is a paradigm that should be adhered to quite strictly with anything of this nature. If you're thinking about any interface, it's something that's going to be utilized, and you want to make sure it's not cluttered and that the things that are important are at the fore for which type of user is going to be interacting with the system. So I'm actually a massive advocate of just even doing a sketch of what you want your interface to look like before you start adding and removing things, which Chris will talk to you about, the simplicity of being able to do that. What you end up doing there is focusing on what's the most important element of functionality or data that needs to be presented to the user. Don't forget that different users can be shown different layouts. So we've got a very extensive permissions model in Dynamics, which allows you to target user groups with all sorts of functionality that's particular to their needs. That's all then manifested upon their login. But just if you think about the concept of wireframing for websites to deliver a better user experience before you go into build, we actually are strong advocates of that at Smart Impact. So when we're going into system implementation, we actually wireframe the CRM back office so that we can give the client a sense of what the interface is going to look like, and then they can make changes to it before we actually commit these to the product in earnest. So there's a lot to be said for, even if you don't use wireframing tools, sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil and just do a little sketch of what the layout might look like before you start making it a reality. The other thing to bear in mind is that with great power comes great responsibility, as I'm sure we're all aware. Because you can add things doesn't mean you should add things. So you can end up with a very cluttered interface because you have the power to add as much as you like to it. That's usually counterproductive. If you go through a bit of a precursory planning stage of mapping out, like I said, what your interface needs to do with a focus on the end user, you'll end up with a far more successful result.
I love that. I love it. And one of the reasons I love what you've said there, David, is because the idea of a client wireframing what different teams should see and what will most benefit them, it really illustrates the difference between older generations of systems where, it was just impossible. That was a ridiculous idea. Everyone got what they were given, and it was the same for everybody pretty much. And if you wanted any changes, then you had to go back to your supplier. So that really emphasizes the change, and it really emphasizes as well what people should be expecting from their systems. And if you're not getting it, even from your dynamic systems with your partner, you really should be demanding that. Chris, would you mind if I just ask you a little bit about where, for your comments as well, and where you think people might be able to get started and what's realistic to achieve?
Yeah, so when it comes to form layouts, or what you see on a contact record, on a membership record, it's all extremely drag and drop, and it's all extremely modular. So if you see the little boxes down on those screenshots of things like your engagement score, your maps, your fields, those things can be moved around. They can be removed completely. You can give extremely streamlined versions to people as required. So if you've ever built an email campaign, something like MailChimp, and you just drag things around, it really is as simple as that to edit out your forms. So doing that via Power Apps is extremely easy. In terms of different use cases, you may have some people who are doing assessments on new members as they register, they may want to only see that kind of assessment related information. You may have people who are managing only the financial aspects of running renewals or direct debit runs, and you only want them to see financial type of information, not allow anyone else to see it. That kind of information or that kind of control we can achieve quite easily. And as David said on the previous section on reporting, having data and the correct data is what a system like this is really all about and what it's supposed to be able to achieve. So to be able to build in business rules for different users to say that this person needs to be able to complete this information, or if you've said that this person is due for a renewal, you need to have a renewal date, and be able to force that kind of compliance, as it were, into the form is also really important and very possible to do as well.
Fantastic. That's really good to hear. And one of the things you said is really reassuring, as well as, yes, David's point, don't muck it up and don't just dump everything on because you can, is that it's really accessible. It's visual in how you do it. You're not going to end up, correct me if I'm wrong, you're never going to end up looking at a screen full of loads of code with loads of brackets and inequality signs and if then else's. It's a much more visual thing to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it would almost be exactly like looking at that and saying that title field, I want that to be at the bottom, and you just drag that field down. It's as simple as that.
Exactly. So no reason for organizations, even if you don't have a huge technology budget and a huge technology infrastructure and team, to be able to take ownership of that themselves. So realistically, just in terms of a nonprofit taking charge of it themselves, we're going to give that, we've talked about the potential downsides, we're going to give that a medium. Are you guys okay with that as a medium area of complexity, partly because of the responsibility of getting it right with the users? Does that chime with your own thinking?
I think so. I think that the increased complexity compared to the green in the previous section is around the governance and just the extra thinking that it requires to be truly successful. As Chris points out, it's not difficult to drop things on a page and to move things around, but you may end up causing more problems for end users than you solve. Just one thing I think is worth mentioning here, with the addition of new fields and new entities, don't assume that it's not going to have a knock-on effect to something else. For instance, if there's something in a portal that's rendering fields dynamically out of an entity and you add a new field, it may end up appearing in the portal, but you don't want it to because you just want it for internal use. Conversely, you might think, oh, if I add a new field to the contact record, it'll be available for the contact, the user who it's related to change in their personal details through self-service. That doesn't automatically happen 9 times out of 10. That's when you'll require some code because of the integration with the website.
Absolutely. That's really good to hear. Great. Okay, so let's move on to the next area, which is another really exciting area for me and really emphasizes the difference in the modern day and client independence. This is client-side automation and streamlining of business processes. One of the reasons I think this is so important is that most of the people on this webinar, where we spend our lives in the not-for-profit sector, in the membership or charity sector, those businesses are heavily rule-based in terms of how they deal with members and supporters. So there's a process of things that get sent to people when they join. There's a process of things that get sent to people when they renew or when they're late for payment or when they book on an event. So all of those things, there are typically very good rules that you can put against them, and therefore those things lend themselves really well to being automated. So let's get into that if we can. So we've put here some key areas of configuration and automation. And I guess so these are tools that you can use to have the stupid computer do things for you instead of the human being. So I guess if I just hand over to you guys to just tell us what tools you feel are most accessible to a user, what you've tended to find being used by your clients, and maybe a use case or two where you've seen it used really well within your clients. If I could just ask you for your thoughts on that, please.
Start with the simplest one, and then I'll hand over to Chris for the more complicated stuff. But without question, I believe customer insights journeys is the most accessible to the vast majority of end users. With a small amount of training, it's quite possible for people to do very complex tasks in terms of developing automation programs of communication. One of the classic use cases for this is for onboarding new members. When someone's submitted their membership application, let's just assume it's a straightforward membership application that doesn't require lots of approval steps and assessment afterwards. So when you pay, you're a member, immediately you can trigger a automated communication cycle, which is a thank you email, for instance, and then followed by some initial onboarding information, and then maybe a week later, more details that could be based on engagement so far. So after someone's been a member for a week, you might look at what they've done in terms of actions that we can track in CRM, and then send personalized messages based on how engaged they are. If they're not particularly engaged, you can change the content of that messaging to enforce some more enthusiasm about interacting, say, with the portal, showing what the value add is. If you log in, you'll be able to do this, this, and this. You'll get member rates and so on and so forth. So as an onboarding tool, it's very easy and very powerful to use. And this is kind of, again, a process that could be followed for a number of things. If people purchase an event place, then you could send them details about the event immediately. And then as the event gets closer and closer, little reminders, giving them some guidance about how to access various facilities and so on and so forth. So customer insights journeys, for anyone who's used an email marketing solution with automation in it, they'll be very, very comfortable with that. The other elements, Power Automate and so on and so forth, are a little bit more complicated, but CI journeys is definitely the most easy to grasp.
And I put a couple of, sorry, just before I'm going to ask Chris to comment. Thank you. In fact, maybe Chris, you could comment on this. I put a couple of screenshots on there of what a user will see, because as soon as you start talking about if the person is active or isn't active, of course, historically, we're thinking, oh, that always needed a programmer to make that decision and to come up with the appropriate, thing that the system would do. And indeed, it used to take teams and months of work to do those things, and it was very rigid once you defined it. What's your thoughts now on how accessible that is? We can see a very visual interface here. Is that realistic, or does it tend to eventually get into something, that a developer will be required?
Yeah, so I think what David said is spot on. So when it comes to automation of communication, so welcome journeys, prompting people to access their portal and things like that, Customer Insights is a great tool, and it's extremely simple. There's no code involved in that. It's all declarative. So we'll just drag a wait cube and say, let's wait for a week before the next email. It's very easy, but it's also quite limited because it's mainly communication based. If we wanted to go into more types of automation, so to say things like when a renewal date becomes due, let's run a renewal process in the background or invoke some other kind of workflows, you're going to be looking at things like Power Automate to do that kind of thing. If we want to do automations across various systems, so to say something like if an assessment or if a dissertation file gets uploaded into SharePoint, then let's create a task within Dynamics. You're going to be looking at Power Automate to do that kind of stuff. And Microsoft puts forward Power Automate as a no-code or low-code solution. And I think they're being a bit generous with that, to be honest. So it can be low code and no code, but you can sometimes have to involve that as well. And I think it's an area where Copilot is going to start making a lot of waves as well. So the ability to put this through in natural everyday language to say something like create a workflow that creates a task for me, to be able to do that within Power Automate is going to be quite a game changer going forward. But it can get quite complicated, and because the sky is really the limit, there is going to be a little bit of technical aspects involved in Power Automate.
Right. That makes an awful lot of sense. So essentially, same questions, because I want to get to the next thing, which is Copilot, and actually, see some software with that. The same questions. How feasible do you think it is for a common or garden curious person within a not-for-profit to be able to take charge of some of these tools here? Customer insight journeys, let's say, and then things like Power Automate, for instance, as two examples. How realistic is that?
I think CI journeys is very realistic. Nobody on this call, by the looks of things, would have any problems getting their head around it and using it to good effect. With all of this, though, I would just say approach with caution. And if you're going to do things in Power Automate or with any significant automation, especially if it's going to affect financial transactions such as renewals and so on and so forth, test everything in a UAT environment. Don't go anywhere near your production environment until you're absolutely confident that the outputs match your expectations, because these are high risk things to get wrong potentially, even though you might be able to do things quite easily with a point and click approach. You need to just make sure that what you're getting at the output matches what your expectations are. And the other thing to bear in mind is if you're doing any testing on stuff that emails lots of contacts, to disable email send from the environment. I know it sounds almost obvious, but the worst case scenario with automation is that you start sending emails out to real contacts, and when you're actually testing things, and you end up getting people calling up going, I received an email about this, what's this all about? So you can really mitigate that by ring fencing your sandbox, as it were.
Great. And so just then to get onto the rating of it, we put automation as a medium for the reasons you said, mostly around the governance, mostly around the approach with caution. You don't want to be sending every single person in your database an email that you didn't intend to send off the back of an ill thought out rule. Fantastic. All right, well, let's get on to Copilot and having a look at what you can do with Copilot. Copilot's one of the most exciting changes, I think, over the last few years. We literally burst onto the scene, AI, as far as we're all aware, only at the end of 2022 with ChatGPT. Suddenly we've got this thing that was a 20-year ahead leap of where any of us expected AI to go. And then at about the same time, Microsoft made this $10 billion investment into OpenAI and just absorbed it into their product. And I, for one, am astonished by how quickly Microsoft have made it part of their offering. So if you go into Microsoft Edge, the free browser, or Bing, you basically have the Copilot add-on there, and it's already available within Microsoft Office and so on. So looking at it within CRM, then let's look at the specifics. There's a lot to show and talk about with what Copilot can be used for. So there's workflow automation, streamlining your personal effectiveness, and making data available to your teams. And what I thought we would do here, I've asked Chris if he could actually give us a little bit of a tour, because it's very easy to show and harder to describe whilst getting it across. So Chris, if you don't mind, if I could hand over sharing to you,
sure.
And then you could just give us a little bit of a live tour of what people are using Copilot for within CRM.
Cool, thanks. If you could just let me know, can you see my screen?
Yeah, looking good.
Brilliant. So as Alan said, so with the rise of things like ChatGPT, we have Copilot being developed alongside that, which is ultimately a ChatGPT or an AI chatbot that lives within your Microsoft products. And if you've used things like Outlook before, you've probably seen Copilot starting to work its way in. It's even appearing in things like Word documents and all of those kind of areas within Microsoft. You're going to see more and more of Copilot. And ultimately, what it gives us the ability to do is, from a front-end perspective, we can ask questions about our data, about our system for help in a language that we understand. So to say things like, how many memberships were created this month, or which memberships are due for renewal this week? Those kind of things are the types of data questions we should expect to be able to ask a system. But it also gives us the ability to do things in the background as well. So I'm quite happy to see from the poll that it's a more technical orientated audience that's probably a bit more interested in what happens underneath the hood. And within Microsoft, we have the Power Platform, which is where we build all of our applications. So whether that's the dynamic CRM for contact records and things like that we may be familiar with, or whether it's mobile apps, we have the ability now to create those apps very easily. So just from a user perspective or a client's perspective, we have the ability to build those. But we also have things like Copilot that's now starting to work its way even into those applications from a development point of view. So I can say things like, let's say, create a mobile app to register new memberships at an event, as an example. And this is just an easy example of the kinds of applications that we may need. And we have the ability within Power Apps to build those applications, but we also have Copilot that can now help us to build those. So we can see within a couple of seconds, it's built out the database structure for us. So it's included things like membership types, registration dates, all of those kind of things. And if we want to ask it to add new fields into that column, we can just simply write that down at the bottom. Let's say create a renewal date column. Columns is another name for fields. And if we just hit that, it will then think about that for a couple of seconds and then add that onto our table of data for us. So we can see we've now added a new field for renewal date, and it knew the type of field that we needed. So I really didn't have to say it needs to be a date specific field. It did all of that for us to create the background database. We can then go create an app. This would take about 30 seconds, so maybe up to a minute. So rather than us sitting here staring at that while it creates the app for us in the background, if we move over to Power Automate, so we've spoken about automation tools, and Power Automate is one of those tools that we have, and we also now have the ability to do a Copilot with that as well. So we could say something like, let's say create a, let's say create a follow-up task when a new membership is created in. So that's, I'm asking it, or I'm telling it in a normal language what it is that I'm looking to do. It will then go in the background, figure out what I'm trying to ask, and it'll say, there we go, when a new record is created within Power Apps, there's going to be an action which is going to create a task. In this case, it's in Planner, so I would probably want to be a bit more specific and say, let's create that task within Dynamics, or let's assign that task to David. We'd be able to do all of those kind of things within a natural language processing. If we go back to Power Apps, my app is now being built, so I can skip that. And here we have our mobile application is all ready, so I can create a new membership. I can go through and view memberships that were already created. If I just hit the play button, that will then take us into our app. So this is what it's going to look like. And from here, we could then also ask it to do certain things. So if we want to ask it within Power, using Copilot down at the bottom, let's say, to create a new button, to create a new task, it would be able to do all of those kind of things for us in real time. So it's really powerful functionality for the back office to be able to create those things without not knowing the code, not even knowing how to use the drag and drop editor. We can just ask it to do things for us. Very quickly, I just want to show you a little bit about the Copilot on the front end as well. So I want a very basic contact record, and on the timeline, which you're probably familiar with, which is where we create all of our activities and things like that. We have the ability to have a Copilot summary of all the activities associated with it. And what it's going to do is read through all the different activities that might be associated with this person across all the different records that might be associated with, and give us an overview. So it's going to tell me things like, Jeremy had, or David had this communication, this person had a follow-up call. If there's any concerns, any aggressive language in the email communication or negative sentiment, it will raise all of that kind of information for us as well. I can then open Copilot and I can start to dig into some of the information there, and I can ask it questions like, let's say, do I have any overdue tasks, as an example. And then it will go off into the system, think about it, find any overdue tasks that I might have, and be able to link me to those records as well while it goes through that. We also have the ability to manage this within customer insights. So this is from the marketing perspective. And we can ask it questions like, how do I create emails within the system? How do I build nice audiences? All of those kind of questions as to how do we use the system, we can ask Copilot to do that. And we even have Copilot starting to work its way into our email builder. So this is a very generic email newsletter campaign that I put up for a fictitious organization. And if I wanted to rewrite this kind of the content of this, I can just go over to the little Copilot symbol on the right-hand side. We can see that it's pulled in a couple of keywords. We can add some new keywords if we want to. We can say what tone do we want to have in the communication. So let's make it formal. And then we can say get ideas. And it's going to think for a couple of seconds, going to have a look at previous email campaigns that we've built so that it knows the kinds of tones and the sort of language that we use. And then it's going to pull in a new version of the content. And we can choose any one of these that we want to and just add it directly into our campaigns like that. And there's a quick overview of Copilot. So from a front-end perspective, from a back-end perspective, there's a lot of development. A lot of it's still kind of in a beta stage as well. So like anything with AI, trust but verify. But I think there's a lot of it's a really bright future, I think, from a low-code or a non-technical development point of view.
And so that's really that's really excellent. Thank you so much.
Cool.
So great, and there really is so much to Copilot. But the key thing is we've given that an easy because it's actually designed for users to be able to take control of it themselves, but to be used with care. So great. Let me jump forward a little bit. If we could just skip forward to the Q&A, guys. If I can just pose some of these questions to you, we've had some really good ones. So one question that we've had is when creating an automation, can I detach that from a user account, perhaps create a system account to manage these so it's not always linked to a user account? Can I get your views on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of ways to do it, and it works in a very similar way. If you've ever worked with an integration between systems, you may have an API user that can do that. So there are different ways to do that. So some automations, you may want to assign that to a user. Other times you may want to just have that as a development user or set up a system user to do that. Yeah, so it's absolutely, you have a lot of control as to who owns that automation at the end of the day.
Great. Thank you. And then a really quick question, I hope, which is the customer insights module? I think people are very interested in being able to take control of the customer insights automation process. Is that a module within Dynamics, or does it something that just needs to be switched on? Is it generally, if not already visible within their platform?
Yeah, so it is a module, so it is a licensed product, so you need to purchase a license for it. It is turn-onable in a way, so it is very easy to install that and set it up. There's very little configuration that goes into it at the end of the day, so it's an easy plug and play to do, but it does require a license, very similar to something like the sales module or for case management, that kind of thing.
It's worth noting that the expenditure on that would replace very much, in most scenarios, would replace what you're spending on a dedicated email marketing platform, for instance, Click Dimensions or Digital. You wouldn't necessarily need both of them. In fact, you probably wouldn't need both of them unless you had some very extreme circumstances. So Customer Insights replaces other tools and then adds a lot more because it's natively integrated with your CRM data.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. And then I want to get through the questions, so it's a quick fire round, if you don't mind. I've got someone very interested in your wireframing comment, David. Is there a particular tool that you would recommend or suggest for wireframing? Is it Post-it notes on the wall? What would you suggest?
You can use a pen and an Etch-a-Sketch if you're that way inclined, but actually Figma seems to be the tool that most people are using these days. It's become the dominant force in UX design, and it's also got a free account which is absolutely serviceable for these needs. You wouldn't even have to pay for a license, and you'd be able to use Figma to its full extent in this context.
Is that spelled the way it sounds, Figma?
It is indeed, yeah.
Great, great. Okay, well, that's some practical help there right away. So then I've got a question about resources that might be available on engagement scoring. Would you recommend, where would you recommend people go for resources that would help them understand the engagement scoring options and how you might go about approaching that?
So I guess just a disclaimer is the engagement score is something that we put together ourselves at Smart Impact. So it's not necessarily something that will be available to other users, but it's just a chart of data. So you would need to understand yourself what kind of information would impact your engagement score. But once you have that kind of data, very similarly to what we discussed on the dashboard side of things, to be able to build a chart to visualize that data and then combine it with our ability to edit the forms of a contact record or something like that, we'd be able to embed those sort of charts onto the form record. So absolutely, you can do it from an account level as well, but it is something you need to do a little bit on your own side to understand the data inputs that are required for that score.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken,
please.
I believe we have a white paper on this subject that I'm sure we'll be happy for anyone to share the link after this webinar.
Cool. Thanks, David.
Great, thank you. I've got a question. Is Power BI a separately licensed, separately chargeable tool?
Yeah, so there are different tiers to Power BI. So there's a Power BI Pro, there's a normal license. So it depends what you're doing with it. So it depends on how you want to share those reports with other people, depends how you want to build them through the desktop app or not. But there is a free version and a Pro or premium version as well.
Right, and a final question in the 1 minute left we have. What would you advise clients to how would you advise clients to approach this? I'm hopeful you'll say something along the lines of clients should make efforts to take ownership of their own systems. Is that what you would advise your clients generally?
I mean, yes, but it is confidence-based, so I think you can never learn too much about things like this. I think if you have a decent process around how you approach this, you can be a lot more confident and risk-averse. And one of the things I'd say is record previous states before you change something. So take a screenshot or maybe a little screen recording of what it was like before you made the change, because you might have to regress back to it if you end up breaking something. Document what you change, and ultimately, when in doubt, don't ask your expert partner, because there's nothing worse than doing something wrong and paying the price afterwards, when all it would have taken is a little email to the experts to say, I'm planning on doing this. Is there anything I should be aware of? If you document your changes, generally it's easy to get back from something that didn't work out. But if you kind of made changes and didn't remember what they were, it's much harder to reverse that.
Really
that
good
effort.
advice. Really good advice. Great. Thank you so much. Right, we're out of time, so I'm just going to wrap up by I'll skip over this. We'll send it to you. As my wrap up and next steps, we'll provide the video as I've mentioned. Please take advantage of your 50% discount code on the course. We're going to send that to you. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one. We're arranging some training programs on how to get the best out of projects and make sure your projects go well and that your colleagues are delighted. Please join us for that. I'd just finally like to say thank you so much to Chris and David. I'm really grateful for your insights. Thank you again.
Yeah,
very welcome. Thank you everyone for sitting through this. Cheers.
Goodbye, everybody. See you on the next webinar. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.